This is a story you'll definitely want to hear to the very end. My dearest reader, allow me to unfurl a tale that has coiled itself around my conscience, a serpent of memory that constricts my every waking thought. I confess this not for absolution, for my soul is a barren landscape beyond the reach of redemption, but to unburden myself of a story that festers within me, a poison demanding release. It is a story of love, of avarice, and of secrets so dark they could extinguish the sun. It begins, as so many tragedies do, with the illusion of a perfect life. A life I had painstakingly constructed, only to watch it crumble into dust. The news of my wife's inheritance arrived on a Tuesday, a day as unremarkable as any other. It came not in a crisp envelope delivered by a solemn-faced solicitor, but through the crackle of a long-distance telephone call, the voice of my mother-in-law, Beatrice, a honeyed venom that dripped into the receiver. "Eleanor, my darling," she cooed, her voice a silken thread weaving its way across the Atlantic. "I have the most wonderful, the most tragic news." Eleanor, my beautiful, fragile Eleanor, sat opposite me in the chintz-draped drawing room of our flat in London, her porcelain features a mask of serene indifference. She was a creature of habit and routine, a woman who found comfort in the predictable rhythms of our life. The inheritance, a vast and unexpected fortune from a distant, childless aunt, was a disruption, a discordant note in the carefully composed symphony of our existence. "Oh, mother, do tell," Eleanor murmured, her voice a faint echo of Beatrice's enthusiasm. She was a good daughter, always deferential, always accommodating. It was one of the qualities that had drawn me to her, that and the quiet sadness that always seemed to linger in the depths of her cornflower blue eyes. Beatrice, a woman whose ambition was as vast and as ruthless as a tidal wave, wasted no time in revealing the extent of Eleanor's newfound wealth. It was a staggering sum, a figure that danced in the air between us, shimmering with possibility and menace. I watched my wife's face, searching for a flicker of excitement, of desire, but there was only a placid acceptance, as if she were being informed of a change in the weather. "We must celebrate, my love," I said, my voice a little too loud in the sudden stillness of the room. I rose and poured us both a glass of sherry, the amber liquid a poor substitute for the champagne the occasion demanded. But we were not champagne people, or so I had always believed. We were sherry people, our lives a quiet, unassuming vintage, aged in the oak-paneled rooms of our respectable, middle-class existence. That night, as Eleanor slept, a delicate tracery of moonlight silvering her hair, I lay awake, my mind a maelstrom of calculation and conjecture. The inheritance was a key that could unlock the gilded cage I had so carefully constructed for us. For years, I had toiled in the dusty corridors of academia, my dreams of literary fame moldering in a drawer, a half-finished manuscript a testament to my deferred ambitions. I had married Eleanor for love, or so I had told myself, but there had always been a pragmatic element to my affections. She was a doctor's daughter, her family respectable, her dowry modest but sufficient. She was a safe harbor, a refuge from the storms of my own restless nature. But the inheritance changed everything. It was a temptation, a siren song that lured me from the placid waters of our life into the treacherous currents of my own dormant desires. I began to imagine a new life for us, a life of travel, of leisure, of literary salons and champagne-fueled soirees. I saw myself as a celebrated author, my name whispered in the hallowed halls of the literati, my wife a beautiful and enigmatic muse by my side. But there was a problem, a formidable obstacle that stood between me and my dreams, Beatrice. I knew her of old, a woman whose love was a possessive, suffocating thing, a love that demanded complete and utter devotion. She had always resented me, had always seen me as an interloper, a man who had stolen her daughter from her. And now, with the inheritance, she would see me as a rival, a competitor for Eleanor's affections, and, more importantly, for her fortune. The next week, Beatrice arrived, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and faux sincere pronouncements of grief. She descended upon our quiet flat like a bird of prey, her sharp, intelligent eyes missing nothing. She cooed over Eleanor, plying her with morbid tales of her aunt's last days, her voice a constant, cloying presence in our home. "You must be so overwhelmed, my darling," she would say, her hand stroking Eleanor's arm. "All this money, all this responsibility, it's too much for you, my poor, delicate child." And Eleanor, my sweet, suggestible Eleanor, would nod, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "I don't know what I would do without you, Mother," she would whisper, her voice barely audible. I watched from the sidelines, a silent, seething spectator. I saw the web that Beatrice was weaving, the subtle, insidious threads of her manipulation. She was a master puppeteer, and Eleanor was her willing marionette. One evening, after a particularly cloying display of maternal concern, I confronted Beatrice. We were alone in the drawing room, the air thick with unspoken animosity. "You're not fooling me, Beatrice," I said, my voice low and menacing. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to turn Eleanor against me." Beatrice smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "My dear boy," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you have no idea what I'm capable of." And in that moment, I knew that this was a battle I could not afford to lose. I had to protect Eleanor, I had to protect our future, and I had to protect myself from the avarice of a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that the greatest threat to our happiness was not Beatrice, but the secrets that lay buried in the heart of my own quiet, unassuming wife. The inheritance had not just unlocked a gilded cage, it had opened a Pandora's box of deception and betrayal, and the horrors that were about to be unleashed would be far more shocking, far more devastating than anything I could have ever imagined. The first tremor of the earthquake that would shatter my world came in the form of a small, leather-bound diary, its pages filled with a secret life that would unravel everything I thought I knew about the woman I loved. And as I turned the first crisp page, I felt a thrill of fear and anticipation, for I knew that I was about to descend into a labyrinth of secrets from which there would be no escape. The confession had begun. I found the diary by accident, or rather, I was led to this discovery with diabolical precision. It wasn't in a secret desk drawer, but almost in plain sight, tucked between volumes of poetry on Eleanor's shelf, as if forgotten in a hurry. The embossed leather cover, which felt like dry snakeskin to the touch, sent a shiver through me on its own. My fingers, trembling with the dark premonition, opened it, and I plunged into a reading that became a descent into a personal hell orchestrated by my wife. The first pages were deceptively innocent, girlish reflections on the weather, on books, on our first dates. But the further I read, the thicker the venom that saturated Eleanor's calligraphic handwriting became. My image, which I had so carefully constructed in my own imagination, the image of an intellectual, a reliable husband, condescending to her simplicity, crumbled to dust. She wrote about me with a chilling, analytical contempt. Today, Arthur read me his drafts again. The same pompous emptiness, the same pretensions to genius. He is so like a peacock displaying its tail in an empty yard, unaware that no one is watching. Sometimes I want to laugh in his face, but I mustn't. The mask of a meek sheep is my only defense in this house, which he considers his fortress, and I, my cage. Cage. The word burned me. I, who considered myself her protector, was her jailer. But this was only the beginning. Next came descriptions of her secret life, a life of which I had not the slightest inkling. She met with people I would have considered rabble, artists from basement studios, stock market players of dubious reputation, women with tired, cynical eyes. These were not love affairs in the vulgar sense of the word. No, this was something else. She studied them, absorbed their vices, their energy, their thirst for life, of which, she wrote, she was deprived in our swamp of respectability. Mother wants my money, she wrote of Beatrice, and my husband wants my admiration. Both are predators. Only one uses fangs and the other a web. They think I am helpless prey. What a disappointment awaits them when they realize they have been dealing not with a lamb, but with a wolf who was simply biding her time. Reading these lines, I felt cold sweat run down my back. The woman sleeping next to me in bed was a complete stranger. Her fragility, her submissiveness, her quiet voice, it was all a grandiose, virtuoso performance. The inheritance was not a burden or a surprise to her. It was a signal, the signal for the hunt to begin. I closed the diary, and the sound of the cover snapping shut echoed in the silence of the room like a gunshot. I looked at the sleeping Eleanor. Her face was serene, her breathing even. But now I saw not an angel, but a monster hiding behind a mask of innocence. And in that moment, I understood two things. First, I was in mortal danger, not physical, but moral and financial. Second, this diary was my only weapon. Beatrice was greedy and predictable. Eleanor, however, was an abyss into which I had gazed and could not now look away. And I decided that if I was destined to fight for this fortune, I would be fighting not one predator, but two. And perhaps, to defeat one, I would have to form an alliance with the other. Beatrice, like an experienced general, launched a full-scale offensive. Every day brought new proposals, a reliable lawyer to handle the paperwork, a trusted financial advisor to manage the assets, a cozy country house where Eleanor could escape the city bustle and collect herself. Of course, all these specialists were her old acquaintances, and the house, as I found out, belonged to a distant relative of hers and was being sold at an inflated price. She enveloped Eleanor in a sticky web of care, constantly emphasizing her vulnerability and my incompetence in financial matters. Arthur is a wonderful man, a scholar, but what does he understand about big money? She would chirp at dinner. A firm hand is needed here, my dear. I saw Eleanor, true to her role, nod obediently, but now I noticed faint sparks of ridicule in her eyes. She was enjoying this game, watching two spiders fight over a fly, not suspecting that the fly had long ago set a trap for them both. I realized that to act alone was to lose. I needed an ally, and as repulsive as it was, the only possible ally was Beatrice. I waited for a moment when Eleanor had gone to her room, citing a headache. Beatrice sat in the drawing room, sipping a gin, her face that of a bird of prey, anticipating a feast. I sat opposite her, and the very silence in the room became tense. Beatrice, I began without preamble, we are both no fools. Let's stop this charade." She raised a perfectly plugged eyebrow. "I don't know what you're talking about, dear boy. You understand perfectly well. You want to gain control of Eleanor's fortune. I, on the other hand, do not want to be left with nothing. Alone, we only get in each other's way. Eleanor is not as simple as she seems." I pause, letting the words take effect. A flicker of interest crossed her eyes. "Go on." "She's playing with us," I said, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "She lets you think you control her, and me that I'm protecting her. In reality, she has her own plans, very far-reaching plans. I didn't mention the diary. That was my trump card, which I had no intention of revealing. But the hint was enough. Beatrice was not stupid and was beginning to feel that her fragile daughter was agreeing to everything a little too easily, without asking too many questions. "And what do you propose?" she asked, and her voice no longer held its cloying sweetness. "An alliance. We act together. We convince her to transfer financial management to a trust where we both have a say. We isolate her from outside influences. We take control of the situation. And when everything settles down, we will agree on a fair division." The word division hung in the air. It was a declaration of war against a woman one of us had given birth to, and the other had sworn to love until death. Beatrice looked at me for a long time, her sharp gaze seeming to pierce my soul, assessing the degree of my villainy. Finally, a smile devoid of all warmth appeared on her thin lips. "I like you, Arthur. You have a spine I hadn't noticed before. Very well, an alliance. But be warned, if you try to deceive me, I will destroy you." She extended her dry, ring-laden hand. I shook it, and the handshake felt like signing a pact with the devil. In that moment, I had definitively crossed the line. I had become a conspirator, a traitor. But strangely, I felt no remorse, only a cold, intoxicating thrill. We were two vultures who had decided to unite to peck our victim to death. We did not yet know that our victim had long ago set the traps, and we were flying headlong into them with relish. My alliance with Beatrice began to operate with the ruthless precision of a clockwork mechanism. We performed a masterfully orchestrated play for Eleanor. Beatrice applied the pressure of maternal authority, painting horrors of the world of big money, full of swindlers and crooks. I, having changed tactics, played the role of the loving husband who, after consulting with wise people, meaning Beatrice, had concluded that for her own good, it was necessary to create a sort of family council to manage the capital. We brought her papers to sign, introduced her to our people, and surrounded her with a dense ring of feigned concern. And Eleanor, my brilliant actress, played her part flawlessly. She would sigh, look confused, thank us for our care, and constantly find excuses to delay the decisive moment. One time she had a headache and couldn't concentrate on the documents. Another time she accidentally spilled coffee on the most important contract. Then she would suddenly remember some old friend she absolutely had to consult with. Every effort we made was met with a soft yet insurmountable obstacle. She slipped away like water through our fingers. My paranoia grew. I reread her diary again and again, trying to find the key to her behavior, but the diary was silent. It described her as contemptuous and calculating, but it did not answer the question of what her ultimate plan was. Beatrice was also getting nervous. "She's mocking us," she hissed during our secret meetings. "That angelic smile of hers, I want to rip it off her face." Our partnership, founded on mutual distrust, began to show cracks. We started to suspect each other of playing a double game. It seemed to me that Beatrice was preparing some move behind my back to cut me out of the scheme. She, in turn, was convinced that I was using her only to gain Eleanor's trust, and then I would get rid of them both. Eleanor, seeing this, skillfully added fuel to the fire. She might complain to me about how domineering and unbearable her mother had become. An hour later, she would tell Beatrice that Arthur had become so obsessed with money lately that it frightened her. She was pitting us against each other, and we, blinded by greed, didn't notice. The denouement came suddenly. One afternoon, Eleanor said she needed to go to the bank to sort out some formalities. She refused our company, saying she wanted to be alone. A dark premonition seized me. I followed her, keeping my distance. She didn't go to her usual bank, but to a respectable private financial institution in the heart of the city. I waited for almost 2 hours. When she came out, she was not alone. Walking beside her was a tall, silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit. They didn't look like lovers. They looked like partners. He listened to her with respect, nodding at her words. And Eleanor? I had never seen her like this. All her fragility, all her feigned timidity was gone. Her shoulders were squared, her gaze was sharp and imperious, her gestures precise and confident. This was a queen giving orders to her vassal. She said something to him in parting, and on her lips flickered the same cold smile I had seen on Beatrice's, only 1,000 times more frightening. In that moment, I understood everything. The diary, my discovery, my standoff with Beatrice, none of it was an accident. It was all part of her plan. We were not the hunters. We were puppets dancing on strings in her cruel puppet theater. I returned home feeling the ground give way beneath my feet. I collapsed into an armchair and began to shake. I realized that the end of this story would not be as I had imagined, and that in this finale, the role assigned to me was not that of the victor, but of a pathetic, crushed fool. That evening, she entered the drawing room. She wore a simple dark dress that emphasized her slender figure. She sat down opposite me, and silence fell upon the room. There was no longer any comfort in this silence, only the ringing anticipation of a verdict. "You followed me, Arthur," she said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Her voice was even, without a trace of emotion. The old Eleanor no longer existed. "Who is that man?" I asked hoarsely. "My lawyer, and my financial manager. Mine, not mother's," she clarified. She paused, as if to let me absorb the full depth of my failure. "I knew you would find the diary," she continued just as calmly. "I put it there myself. I knew that your vanity and literary ambitions would make you believe that melodramatic story of a secret life and repressed passions. You so wanted to believe you hadn't married a simpleton, but a mysterious heroine of a novel, didn't you?" Every word was a lash of a whip. "But why?" I whispered. "Why?" She gave a bitter smile. "To see how far you both would go. You and my dear mother. All my life, I was nothing more than a project for her, an investment. And for you, a convenient backdrop for your failed genius. I knew that as soon as the money appeared, your true faces would be revealed in all their glory." And then she delivered the final crushing blow. "Except, Arthur, there is one small detail you both missed. There was no aunt. There was no inheritance." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "The money," she said slowly, enunciating each word, "is mine. I earned it myself, over the last 5 years, through a shell company, dealing in venture capital, something an intellectual like you has never even heard of. I just needed to legitimize it, to bring it into my life. The story of an inheritance from a mythical aunt was the perfect cover and the perfect bait for two rats. She stood up. I've already explained everything to Mother. Her lawyers have been notified that any attempt to dispute my right to my own money will lead to a public scandal she will not survive. She is leaving tomorrow morning. She walked to the door. I've had your things packed. They're in the hall. You can consider it payment for the 8 years I wasted playing the role of your quiet, adoring wife. A role which, I confess, I found repulsive. She opened the door and turned back. There was no hatred in her eyes, no anger, only a cold, infinite contempt. Do you know what your greatest tragedy is, Arthur? You always dreamed of writing a great novel, but you never realized that all this time you were merely a minor, pathetic character in mine. The door closed behind her. I was left alone in the silence of the drawing room that, just an hour ago, had been mine. I was broken, destroyed, ground to dust. I had nothing left. No wife, no money, no home, no illusions. All I had was this story, a confession of greed, of betrayal, and of how I, who considered myself the cleverest of schemers, was outplayed by a woman I had mistaken for a witless doll. And now I write it, not for fame, not for money, but only because it is the only thing I have left. It is my last and only truth, the truth of my complete and utter nothingness. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to the channel, and you'll hear even more captivating tales.